At HDR, we've always helped communities adapt to a changing world. From bringing power to the plains more than 100 years ago to reimagining how we connect, how we answer challenges, and how we shape a brighter future.
With the unique perspective of many, we're motivated to shape our world for the better through our work and our compassion. At HDR, we do things right to make great things possible.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Mike Barton and I'm with HDR. On the behalf of our 10,000 employee owners, HDR is proud to be a sponsor of Tucson Transportation Talks. HDR, and especially our local team of 40 transportation professionals, look forward to continuing our decades-long partnership with the City of Tucson in solving our community's transportation challenges. We are excited about the next couple of days to engage in thoughtful conversation and dialogue to share ideas. And let's keep Tucson moving safely, equitably, and smartly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you for sponsoring this session.
You bet.
Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriela Barias Longoria. I'm going to be moderating this with the City of Tucson Department of Transportation and Mobility. And we are going to start off with just a brief synopsis of what we'll be speaking about today. So many community members are resistant to implementing bus rapid transit and complete streets designs that will change how they get to places that they need to go. Unlike asphalt and concrete infrastructure, quick build street designs can be easily adjusted by adding a planter box, moving bollards, or simply restriping a lane and extending the public comment period beyond implementation. So today we will hear how cities are using pop-ups and quick build projects as a tool for public engagement and project delivery. First, we will hear from Dana Wall. She is a senior project manager from Street Plans. And Street Plans is a large organization. They work nationally, and she's based out of the Miami office. She earned a Master in Urban and Regional Planning and a Master of Science in Environmental Planning from University of Michigan, where she focused on public and open space design and planning. At Street Plans, she's managed over 15 quick build projects and was the principal investigator on one of the firm's most recent publications. And when one of the publications was Fast Track to Tactical Transit Study. She has contributed her planning and design skills to multiple active transportation master plans and quick build best practice guides, including the Let's Ride JC Bicycle Master Plan, NACTO's Street for Pandemic Response and Recovery Guide, among others. She's represented Street Plans at over 10 national, local, and regional conferences, and she has had articles published in the Miami Herald. Then we will hear from Noelle Pond-Danchik. She's a transportation planner from Oakland Department of Transportation. And she works on the bicyclist and pedestrian team as the pedestrian program coordinator. And she's currently one of two of the department's racial equity team chairs. She works on Oakland's Slow Streets and Essential Places program. In addition, she works on the pedestrian plan implementation, Paint the Town program, and is the staff liaison for the Bicyclist Pedestrian Advisory Commission. Then we will hear from Christine Fanchi, transportation engineer, transportation and traffic operations in Escambia County and all the way in Florida. So she has 21 years of engineering and planning experience. She's excited to be leading the transportation division of Escambia County through her role as a transportation engineer. She oversees the planning, design, and signal operations team to create a safe and equitable transportation network. She has a passion for design to protect vulnerable users through Vision Zero principles, is leading projects to create multimodal opportunities where appropriate, and works across the aisle to bring state, county, and city engineers together to discuss best design practices on projects. She has a background in civil engineering from Auburn University, and she spent 15 years in the private sector in Phoenix and 5 years at the city of Fort Lauderdale before joining Escambia County recently in February 2020. And then lastly, we will hear from Matthew Moran. He's the transit team director all the way in Boston Transportation Department. So he is, in his role, Matt oversees the planning, design, and installation of new bus priority measures in the city of Boston. He joined the BTD, with Boston Transportation Department, in February 2019, and he has implemented 4 bus lane projects since then. Additionally, he's helped the city advocate for better rail service in the MBTA network. He has 14 years of professional transportation planning experience in the US and in Canada. And he previously worked for the Boston Planning and Development Agency, HDR, AECOM, and New York Police Department. He holds a master's degree in city planning from the University of Pennsylvania and an undergraduate degree from Fordham University. He is a Quincy, Massachusetts native and now lives in Boston's Dorchester neighborhood. He's a travel nut, loves running and exploring urban spaces. So great panel here. Really excited. Let's hear from them now. Dana, will you, so we'll hear from Dana first.
Thank you, Gabriella. Thank you everybody for having me. I am going to share my screen and get my presentation up. I'm particularly really excited to be here today because I grew up in Tucson. And I was most recently in Tucson pre-pandemic getting engaged. So that was over a year ago now, but I have really fond memories of Tucson. So I'm going to kick us off today with my presentation about delivering lasting impacts from pilot projects. Just a little bit about street plans. You know, as Gabriella mentioned, we are a transportation planning and urban design firm. We focus on active transportation planning, specifically bicycle and pedestrian planning and design. And we also specialize in tactical urbanism. So we often integrate tactical urbanism or the quick build methodology into our master plans as a way to vet and test out the proposals that we are recommending. And we also do one-off tactical urbanism and quick build projects for cities and nonprofits and other entities wishing to test before they invest, as we say. So we have documented this methodology since 2011, and we have created since then several open source guides that contain materials and design information about how to execute quick build projects. And we most recently, last year, worked with NACDO as well as Sam Schwartz Engineering on the Streets for Pandemic Response and Recovery Guide, which is on NACDO's website. So I like to start out just with a quick overview of tactical urbanism. You know, as planners and designers, typically we'll take something like this and we will create on a computer something like this. But often, you know, the hard part is getting from something like this to this. And typically, you know, the typical capital process and city process is to basically jump from those designs to a permanent project. And the quick build methodology is all about breaking down that process into smaller, more temporary increments that you can then iterate upon and improve the design and improve the project until you arrive at the permanent project. So the goal is to have a permanent project that has already been tested, evaluated, and vetted before, you know, potentially millions of dollars are invested in that infrastructure. So the idea is that, you build a project, you learn from it and evaluate, potentially make tweaks as necessary, and you just kind of continue that process until you get to the permanent version. So this is the definition that we like to use for tactical urbanism, or the quick build methodology. So it is an approach to neighborhood building that uses short-term, lower relatively cost and scalable interventions to catalyze long-term change. And that's really the key piece that we're talking about here, is that how do we use it to get to those lasting impacts and potentially influence those permanent projects. So it is less expensive than capital projects. Tactical urbanism projects are temporary, although that can mean anything from a weekend to 3 to 5 years. Often they are based on existing plans and existing goals that cities have for active transportation achievements. And then they are also people-driven and people-centered. So we at least use a lot of volunteers in our projects, and that is typically a part of the public engagement of our master planning projects. So I'm going to go over 3 case studies of projects that we have done, and each one is going to have a little bit different of a takeaway in terms of lasting impact. And then I'm going to conclude just with some key takeaways about how sometimes, the lasting impact is not getting necessarily to that permanent project immediately, but there are plenty of other benefits and lasting impacts from doing these projects. So I'm going to share a couple of examples. This first one is a project that we did in 2018 in Asheville, North Carolina. High level description is it was a 1-lane elimination project in each direction. The city was working on a plan or a redesign for this 1/3 of a mile corridor adjacent to downtown Asheville. And they wanted to add enhanced bicycle infrastructure and sidewalk extensions. And so we were hired, and we did several public workshops to go over the design alternatives. And what ended up being the project was sidewalk extensions, basically a shared mobility lane. So that was a sidewalk extension, which included a bike lane, as well as space for people to rollerblade, scooter, and walk. So these are just some sort of in progress photos. The project did include a mural there in the center block of the corridor. The project also included 8 new crosswalks. We worked with the city to install, all of the necessary other signage and other things around those crosswalks. We had 2 types of physical protection along the shared mobility lane, which included large planters, as well as these low profile delineators. And this is what it looked like after. So you see here, this is the shared mobility part there, primarily the beige piece adjacent to the curb side. And we just basically popped out the on-street parking that was there. So we took a lane in each direction and really tightened up this roadway a bit. This is just an image of the mural that we did in the middle of the street. We worked with a local artist. She actually designed it. And then we also worked with a local maker who helped us with the stencils. I think it ended up being like over 20 different stencil pieces or something that we used to implement this mural. Just another couple of photos. Signage is always included. A couple of close-ups of, one of the crosswalks there. And we also did a bike box as Asheville's actual first bike box was a part of this project. So these are just some snippets from the report, from the final report for the project. So a couple of the major successes and takeaways from the 6-month demonstration or pilot project was that it really reduced speeding. So the highest speed before the project was almost 90 miles per hour. That was kind of the absolute highest that a car had ever been recorded on that corridor. And then after the project, those high speeds were substantially reduced. And as well, also very important, the car traffic throughput was unchanged. So the project itself did not cause any more congestion. It didn't cause, the average daily traffic did not change. And, of course, with lower and reduced speeding, we also see, lower risk of pedestrian fatality. That was also a very important takeaway. And then we also had a company do a sort of analysis, a more like placemaking analysis. And, it's a little complex to go into in this presentation, but essentially, they concluded that the project basically made the corridor a little bit more pleasant for people to not only pass through and pass on, but reside on as well. So about 2 years later, the center mural was removed. So as you can see, the project has, faded pretty substantially in 2 years. The city's design process for this corridor has been basically put on hold because of the pandemic. So there aren't any, immediate actions that are going to be taken because of the project, in terms of the permanent project. However, the project is kind of taking on a new role as helping to facilitate social distancing and outdoor dining and all of those sort of interim changes that cities are making to accommodate, safety during the pandemic. So this is an example of kind of a slight tweak where, maybe one piece of the project was removed, but then the rest of it was able to be kept on and repurposed, and it will continue to remain until the permanent redesign of the corridor. Second case study is some of our work in Jersey City. So we both primed the bicycle master plan recently, and then we also supported with public engagement for the pedestrian enhancement plan. And so both of these efforts were around 2018, 2019. And in both of these efforts, we were in charge of including temporary demonstration projects as a part of public engagement, and also to vet some of the initial proposals that we were making for the bikeway network and for intersection improvements for the pedestrian enhancement plan. So these are the demonstration projects. This is just one example. We did them at 6 intersections throughout Jersey City as a part of the public engagement for the pedestrian enhancement plan. They were exceptionally temporary, so much more temporary than the first case study I went through. That was more of a 6-month pilot project evaluation period. And these were made with tempera paint, so they pretty much washed away with the first rain. And we used very temporary foil-backed traffic tape for these as well. And this was the demonstration project that we did that was a part of the bicycle master plan. This is on Bergen Avenue, so it's one of the corridors that we were really heavily looking at for the plan. And similar to the curb extensions, this was just done over a weekend. We used all very temporary materials to demonstrate this as a part of the public engagement. And so Jersey City, we always say, is kind of like an all-star city in terms of taking things from temporary to permanent. They are an incredibly unique city in the sense that they really have taken the methodology and run with it. They have done some incredible implementation since our temporary projects and even before the final bicycle master plan was published. So, immediately following the pedestrian enhancement plan, they did implement 50 interim design curb extensions in the summer following the draft plan, including at the locations that were tested by the projects. And then similarly, even before the bike master plan was published, they actually managed to implement 5 miles of interim design protected bike lanes. And they have retained us to continue to help them with the design of the interim design and consulting services for specifically for bicycle facilities that were proposed in the master plan. And in addition to these plans, they have also adopted a parklet design guide and are streamlining a permitting process for that. So basically within, a year to 2 years, they have started to implement a lot of the recommendations in a quick build fashion, and they are having a lot of success with it so far. This is an example of one of their bike lanes that was a part of the plan that they did. Interim, here's another one. And then another example of one we designed that is an interim state. So final case study that I'll go over is the Go Ojai pilot project in Ojai, California. This is a more recent project that we did. It's actually still in the ground, so it's still being evaluated. similar to the first case study, this is a lane reduction, one lane reduction in each direction to make space for parking protected and separated bicycle facilities, as well as curb extensions. So, you know, the city had been working on this corridor for a long time, basically since 2015, and they decided that, you know, one of the ways to help them sort of arrive at the permanent design would be to do something on a temporary basis. So we were hired to do a 6-month temporary project along this roughly 3/4 of a mile corridor. And something interesting to note about this corridor is that it is actually a highway. So, you know, if anyone has any questions about doing pilot projects on highways, feel free to let me know. It's a little bit more complex of a permitting process, but so these are just some images of what the final project looked like. We again used some of those low profile delineators from Zikla. We also tried out one of their newer products. Zikla is a Spanish manufacturer, by the way, and we use a lot of their products in our quick build projects. So we also used planters. And then of course we had volunteers help us with some aspects of the build. Couple more aspects, we actually had to use contractors this time to comply with Caltrans permitting, but we were still able to integrate volunteers into the process. And these are just some aerial views of what the after condition looked like. So you can see that we reduced this highway to 1 lane, which, you know, the city had done previous studies that justified taking this lane. It was still a really interesting exercise in public engagement. But I am happy to say that the evaluation is going well so far. Here's another view. So similar to the first case study, there's been a really, really substantial decrease in speeding, you know, primarily just because, you know, now there's an on-street parking lane adjacent to the travel lane in each direction, which creates that sort of perceived friction and speed reduction. But you know, we also took away basically the passing lane that a lot of speeders like to use. So speeding has definitely been decreased. Within the first month and a half, we saw really substantial increases in both pedestrian and bicycle activity. And then, you know, a really nominal / really no detection yet at least of increases in congestion and dwell times, or really in cut through traffic through the adjacent neighborhoods off of the corridor. So going well so far. We have had issues with planters being hit, as well as some minimal compliance with some of the other aspects of the project. But a really big win from this project is that, you know, the city is actually going to be extending it to overlap with full in-person session for school again, and just to continue to get some more evaluation and have the community get a little bit more used to it. The primary feature of the permanent design is the lane reduction. So that's really what the city wants to test here and make sure that it works well. The city is going to be considering tweaks to the pilot project design. So they are going to be applying just to potentially do some restriping. They're considering, you know, a variety of things like taking away some of the parking on one aspect of the corridor or one area, one segment. And then the permanent design is on hold until the full pilot project period, the full evaluation period. So they really are, you know, holding on the permanent design so that they make sure that any little learnings they get, you know, whether it's as minute as possible, they can include into the permanent design. So a couple of key takeaways just from these case studies, you know, like I said, obviously tactical urbanism and the quick build methodology is meant to do a variety of things, get projects in the ground faster than the normal capital process, expand public engagement, but ultimately, you know, you're trying to reach a permanent project. You're trying to reach something that could be in the ground permanently after having been evaluated and implemented for a lower cost. However, you know, a lot of our projects that we do, cities leave them in the ground, you know, and they can actually last, like I said, 3 to 5 years and beyond, as well as they're being regularly maintained. And for some cities that is actually still more cost effective than starting to pour concrete and using more permanent materials. And so, you know, sometimes in the case of this first bullet, at least in our experience, permanent does not have to necessarily mean pouring concrete. You can have some of these projects last a good while and still get benefits from them. Also, lasting impacts of tactical urbanism or quick build that we don't always think about are not only just about the infrastructure. So, you know, a couple of our projects, and then obviously case studies that we know of have resulted in cities taking a look at their internal permitting processes. They've taken a look at their staff, for example. Can we, you know, make a designated staff team just for quick build projects? How can we streamline our permitting to allow for more temporary materials and to allow for an accelerated implementation? And so that's almost kind of like the next phase that we see for a lot of cities, is really internalizing this process and figuring out how to accelerate it, you know, with their own staff and their resources. Leaving these quick build projects in the ground, like I mentioned, for longer than the evaluation period is also considered a big success. You know, you can see that in the case of the first case study in Asheville I went over, obviously that is, you know, the pandemic has been terrible in many ways, but they were able to, because they had that infrastructure in the ground, basically repurpose it so that corridor could be, you know, really a safer place for people to get exercise and to eat outside and that sort of thing. So because they left it in the ground, they were able to use it for that purpose. And then finally, I'll just mention, you know, like I said, the case of Jersey City, for example, they have really been really a leader, at least, you know, from a lot of the clients that we have worked with. And so, you know, these projects might seem, you know, easier to implement, but it really does depend a lot on multiple factors, and a couple of those factors being, you know, the project partner or the client. So, you know, how ready is the city really to do these sorts of projects? And also, you know, political will ties into that a little bit. So those are typically the areas that we see the most success, is sort of the readiness of these cities to really take on this methodology and run with it. And, you know, that will really determine the magnitude of lasting impact in a lot of cases. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dana. That was a wonderful presentation. Now, Noelle, you're up next. We have to make up a little bit of time, so we'll try to keep the presentations as brief as possible. That way we have time for Q&A. So take it away, Noelle. I will share. Sorry?
Go ahead. Thanks, Gabriella. Cool, and thanks for pulling up my presentation too. My internet is a little spotty, so I think I'm going to stay off video for now as well. So sorry about that, but good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for having me. I'm going to be talking about one example of our quick build projects and how we're moving forward with it now in response to COVID-19. I think there's an earlier slide. Oh, yeah, just the intro one, thanks. So yeah, it looks like we're a little bit behind time, so I'll try and be quick, but my email's at the end. I'd be happy to follow up after and hear from you. Like Gabriella said, my name is Noelle Pondanchik. I'm a transportation planner in Oakland, California for our Department of Transportation. I'm on the bike and pedestrian team and our department's racial equity team chair. And I'm also involved in our Slow Streets program, which I'll be talking about today. Next slide. So I'm sure many of you know what Slow Streets are, but just to get us all on the same page, a little background on our program. It was launched in April of 2020 in response to COVID-19. Its initial goal was to create more space for comfortable and physically distant walking, wheelchair rolling, jogging, biking, etc. across the city by closing streets to through traffic using cones, barricades, and signage like you see on the left. And it was later expanded to include the Slow Streets Essential Places component, which you see a photo of on the right. Slow Streets Essential Places came because we were hearing from a lot of our neighborhoods, especially our lower income and some neighborhoods in Deep East Oakland, that the Slow Streets program wasn't meeting the need of our most underserved Oaklanders, that it didn't help them access essential jobs or fit in with neighborhood culture. and it wasn't addressing real problems of traffic violence and speeding on major arterial streets. So hearing this, we came up with Slow Streets Essential Places, which are a mix of permanent and temporary traffic safety improvements, things like signage, daylighting, pedestrian refuges, bulb outs, or setting pedestrian signals to recall to enable safer access for residents to essential services, which we defined as grocery stores, food distribution sites and public facilities, or COVID-19 testing sites that overlaid with our high injury network, where we see the most injuries and prioritized these locations based off of our geographic equity toolbox, which uses some indicators like race and income. So here's a quick overview of our timeline. So right now we're in what we're calling phase 2. We stopped rolling out new slow streets and we're evaluating the program corridor by corridor and making some changes that will last until the end of shelter in place. And to be honest, we're still kind of figuring out what happens after that. Next slide. So the essential places aspect of slow streets has actually been a lot easier for us to transition. And in fact, at some point, we started installing them just straight away using flex posts like you see on the right, rather than cones, because the cones were just getting knocked over or destroyed so quickly. And we're in the middle of applying for some grants to upgrade a lot of these treatments to concrete as well. Next slide. Moving forward with the slow streets corridors is a bit more involved. Like I said, it's kind of, we've heard more different feedback on the program. It's been very successful in our wider and higher income neighborhoods where a lot of folks are telecommuting, and we got a lot of support from these neighborhoods from our early engagement. But we've gotten less engagement and more mixed feedback from our corridors in what we call our high priority neighborhoods with higher concentrations of BIPOC and low income folks, and on busier streets, corridors that have higher traffic volumes. So we both want to be responsive to people who love it and say that they want it to stay forever. And we also want to be responsive to folks who are saying this isn't what their neighborhood needs and maybe is causing traffic issues. So right now we're in the midst of sending out surveys to every resident along a slow streets corridor, asking whether they want their slow street to be upgraded to more durable materials with slow street specific signage. It's pretty small, but you could see there's some images on the signage at the right that were made actually by a local artist on them, and it's slow street branded. And so then it's also using those larger barricades and the flex posts rather than cones, and everything's drilled into the street, so they're less likely to walk away or be knocked over. And then we're also, the other option on our survey is, do you want the slow street removed? Is it not working for your street? And maybe what could we provide in lieu of the slow streets program? And then we're also asking for specific changes to individual locations along a corridor. For instance, this street, this is Brookdale Ave in Oakland, and we heard a lot about issues with major intersections with this slow street and how it can kind of create some problems with vehicles queuing at the intersection. And so we've made some specific changes at the intersections with those larger streets. And for this outreach, we're prioritizing the corridors that we reach out to and make changes to based on high priority neighborhoods where the program is most likely to not be working, and to have the higher maintenance needs streets first. So streets where these are constantly getting knocked down, that's not very sustainable for our maintenance crews. So we're trying to get those to some kind of more durable or more permanent place first. So like I said, we're not exactly sure what happens at the end of shelter in place. Our legislation makes it a little complicated to know if and how we might make these slow streets permanent. But besides that, and more importantly, I don't feel like we have enough feedback on making it permanent and how residents on adjacent streets are likely to feel to make that call yet, especially because, like I said, it's a bit more of a controversial program compared to something like Essential Places, which we just went in and are going ahead with upgrading to permanence with concrete. So yeah, given that, we don't want to just slip it in without doing the more in-depth community engagement that it needs. Next slide. Yeah, so that's just a little introduction to our program and kind of the way we're thinking about it at this point. Here's my email. Very excited to hear from the other cities and to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noelle. That was a fabulous presentation. I know as the program manager for Slow Streets here in Tucson, that to what you're doing in Oakland as like the North Star. So thank you so much and look forward to the Q&A later. Okay, so next we have Christine.
Gabriella, can you pull up my presentation?
Yeah, it'll be just one moment.
Excellent. So excited to be here today. Thanks for having me. Used to be in Arizona for a long time, as you heard from Gabriella, and I'm excited to be talking to my Arizona friends. So good morning. I'm just going to jump right into it. As you heard, I'm an engineer, so I have a little bit different perspective, and look forward to the questions so that you can ask any questions about the engineering phase. But before you is a project that is in downtown Fort Lauderdale, and it connects downtown Fort Lauderdale to the beach. Is a major corridor, high volumes of walking, biking, and driving. And so probably 2013-ish, unfortunately, they had a pedestrian fatality right here at this crosswalk, and the city was really proactive to put in this high visibility crosswalk and an RFB. They actually had the flags you can see there in the middle picture to try to do something really quickly. Unfortunately, the speeds of the cars during the non-peak did not slow down, and people were really still looking for space to bike safely. And so the city worked in 2017 to work with the businesses and put together a temporary project into the ground. It was done relatively quickly, probably within 6 months. A lot of community engagement. And you can see a protected bike lane was created using planters, paint, delineators. We had a lot of education that was either spray painted on the road, or we had signs on delineators telling people where to bike, where to park. So a lot of education. An evaluation was done, and that was presented to the board as well. This next slide is from my experience in Phoenix. In 2013, I was really honored to be asked to work with the city of Phoenix directly and work with NACTO to host the Designing Cities Conference that October. And so in May, they brought me in to the city, and I got to convert two high-speed roadways leading into downtown Phoenix. This one is Grand Avenue, which was a state highway at one point, but the city had taken it over at this time. And so it was a 5-lane corridor, basically saw, 16,000 cars between 7 and 8 a.m. and saw those cars go back home at 5 p.m. So you can see there's it was kind of a ghost town between those times. And so the community kind of came out. It was a kind of a re-emerging neighborhood, a lot of artists, and they said they understood the value of complete streets and asked for a road diet and bike lanes. They really wanted, more landscaping. Oops, can you go back? Sorry. So they were able to create space. You can see on the right, 3 lanes, first green bike lanes in Phoenix. Of course, we were after Tucson, but you're able to create space. And they're still working on the permanent design as far as I know. The speeds came down significantly. Next slide. The next slide is a parklet that was done. It's the first parklet actually in Arizona, in front of Matt's Big Breakfast on First Street. On the left, you can see there was 2 parking spots there. Then we did the temporary parklet that parked about 40 people. And then they made it permanent just recently with a road reconstruction project. So the city of Phoenix actually has a parklet guide that was created. I'm not sure how many they have now, but that's available on their website, City of Phoenix website. Next slide. So I'm going to jump into some projects that I did in Fort Lauderdale with my awesome director, Diana Alarcon, who's now there in Tucson. So Bayview Drive was an example where we had a resurfacing project. We were going to resurface 3 miles of it. It's basically the corridor midway between A1A and Federal Highway. And so it goes through all these neighborhoods, and got a hold of it and was able to redesign it to have 10-foot lanes. It's posted 30 miles an hour. So the 10-foot lanes work beautifully. And then where the areas where we had extra pavement, we were able to create the buffered bike lane. As you can see, we used the green mats and created a bike box at the south end to connect people to the beach. So this was actually like a 0 cost add to a resurfacing project that was gonna happen anyway, and it's added a lot of value and really created a key corridor for bicyclists to move north-south within the city of Fort Lauderdale. The next one is within Victoria Park, which is a historic neighborhood right close to downtown in Fort Lauderdale. The neighborhood did not have a place to bike or walk on this corridor, and it connected basically the heart of the neighborhood to downtown shopping, dining, and work. And so we were able to, through basically removing that white stripe on each side. I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's a white stripe that we removed, and we just moved it basically 1.5 feet in and did 10-foot lanes and created the 4-foot bike lane. And people are using it more as like a multi-use path. But the only cost was removal of those white stripes, and then we refreshed the double yellow, the new white stripes, and then the green mats. And so it was a really low cost, very quick creation of a bike walk area. The next project is 13th Street, which is more of a final infrastructure, but it was phased. And unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the delineators that we put in, but the thought was we would do a road diet on this project. You can see the top left was a 5-lane corridor through a commercial district. The issues were speeding, crashes, and really little walkability and bikeability. And the city received a grant to do a complete streets project. And my director at the time said, why don't we just test it with delineators? And so we were able to test it down to 1 lane each direction to try to get some public buy-in. And the traffic worked beautifully and actually helped the staff feel more comfortable moving forward with the lane elimination. And we were able to basically check off every single desire that the community wanted with this project within the existing right-of-way, which is pretty tight already. So we were able to implement, obviously, the 1 lane each direction. We did a 9-foot center turn lane, 6.5-foot green bike lanes, 7-foot parking aisle. We widened the sidewalks to 7 foot and put in all the lighting. We also did new crosswalks. The artwork was done by the community that you see in the center picture. And then if you'll flip to the next slide, the intersection, we were able to remove a signal and then put in a roundabout, which created a lot of traffic calming for this neighborhood. And the community came together and got a grant for the art piece that was put in the middle, and it was built by the community. And you can see that bottom picture is a little bit of education that says traffic does not stop in roundabout, because this was the first roundabout on a non-local. And we have a lot of roundabouts in neighborhoods, but not in a commercial area. And so we had a little bit of education phase on this. So by and by, this has been an extremely successful project that has redeveloped basically every business within the corridor and brought the community to life. The next project, Old Dixie Highway, actually stems off that roundabout that I just showed you. And this one really built on the existing, and maybe it wasn't temporary, but it just really built on what was there before and added value to the community. Unfortunately, the reason for the project was we had 2 bicyclists that were fatally killed riding on Dixie Highway. And so the project came together and created continuous bike lanes and sidewalks on both sides, had a lot of traffic calming on this roadway. Every crosswalk was raised. And then we added a roundabout at the north end. So you've got roundabouts kind of at each end of this project connecting to the 13th Street project. So this project has become kind of a model for every other neighborhood in Fort Lauderdale wanting something like this to create safety and value in their neighborhood. 4th Avenue is a great example of doing using paint basically to redelineate on a state highway. Definitely wanted to highlight this project. It might not be as gorgeous as the other ones, but we basically were working with the state. The local MPO had planned for this to be a bike corridor. And I had recently started at the city, and the state was planning to bump out the curbs and take away the landscape buffer and the trees to add the bike lanes. And the traffic volumes were only around 16,000 vehicles. Of course, they were forecasting it would go to 28,000. That's why they needed the 4 lanes. But we basically had that discussion about the real traffic volumes and was there a possibility. And they had just adopted the statewide lane elimination guidance. And we were able to basically walk through that process. The city did the traffic engineering and the public outreach and received resolutions from both the city of Fort Lauderdale and the city of Wilton Manors to the north. Sorry, can you go back one? Sorry. And work through that state process to be able to get the lane elimination approved from the central office in Florida. And then once we had that typical section, we were able to move into design, and the state took over from there once they had approved design. So this went from a 5-lane, 12-foot lanes to 3 11-foot lanes, 6-foot buffer, and a 6-foot bike lane. There's 3 schools and on this corridor, and it's been a huge asset. I've had people that weren't very much in favor of this project that have come back and said, it really works beautifully, and it's really a pleasure to be on this corridor now, as it wasn't before. And then the last I just wanted to show off, because it's a great example of traffic calming, was we did a raised intersection in downtown Fort Lauderdale where there's a lot of high volumes of cars and pedestrians. And we were able to implement the raising of the whole intersection. It's about 6 inches of raise. And so people are just behaving so well. It has done just a huge transformation of behavior for both the vehicular and the pedestrians. The pedestrians are feeling very safe, and the vehicles are really yielding to the pedestrians at this intersection. So I've been at Escambia County in Northwest Florida for about a year now, and have teed up a lot of projects, but I'm hoping that I get to talk to you maybe in a year or 2 and tell you about all the success. I'm working on a bike lane to our beach, right now. It's supposed to be implemented this month. I'm working on a roundabout, first roundabout in Escambia County out on Perdido Key Beach. This is the public engagement that we did there. And the public engagement in at least Northwest Florida during COVID has been a hybrid of, online and in person with social distancing. So we've been kind of trying a lot of different things and had actually pretty good success. So I look forward to the questions so that we can work together to create these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Very inspiring presentation, and it's great to hear from an engineer and your experience. And so I appreciate it. So we have 11 minutes left of this session. We still have another wonderful speaker. I'm going to let Matt take it away, and hopefully we have a couple minutes for Q&A, but we definitely want to hear him speak first.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted. So thanks, everyone. I'll try to be quick so we have time for questions and answers. As Gabriella said, my name is Matt Moran. I work for the Boston Transportation Department. See, there we go. So quick agenda. I'll talk to a little bit about the unique role that my team, the transit team, plays within BTD. Go through 2 project examples of when we did a pilot, when that was, I think, pretty successful. And then another one of when we skipped a pilot and sort of the justification for those 2 things. So a little overview of the transit team. So as I mentioned before, we play a unique role because we are within the City of Boston's Transportation Department, but we partner regularly on all of our projects with the MBTA, Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, which is the regional transit agency for Greater Boston. 3 main goals that we have within BTD and within the transit team: improving safety and reliability, enhancing mobility, and improving the public realm on our city streets. This picture on the right is an image of a bus lane, a quick build bus lane being installed. One thing that's interesting, just to quickly note, is they actually sort of sprinkle the red paint down and put it on top of an epoxy. So that's what you're seeing there on the right. So what do we do at BTD? So at BTD, we manage things like street functionality, traffic signals, street widths, curb regulations, lane assignments. The MBTA obviously manages routes, schedules, fares, fleet size and distribution. So by partnering together, we can improve, most importantly, bus service on our city streets for many of our residents who rely on buses every single day. So why focus on bus priority? So the quality of trips, especially pre-COVID, and we expect traffic will get sort of back to where it was at some point before this, as we emerge from the pandemic, quality of bus trips was declining, largely due to congestion. We have a citywide transportation goal, and I'll talk about that in a second, of improving our mode share for all of our active and transit modes. Equity is a paramount concern, and buses tend to serve some of the most vulnerable roadway users and neighborhoods in the city. Accessibility needs to be improved, so we need to create sidewalks and bus stops that are fully ADA compliant. And of course, we can make improvements to buses quickly in a way that we can't do with other more capital-intensive transit investments. So again, going back to our goals, our goal within BTD is to reduce driving alone by half, and then to increase public transit, walking, and cycling. And so these mode share goals really help to inform how we do roadway design, and it also helps to inform how we do public process and sort of start to think about some of these issues. And Go Boston 2030 came out in 2017. So that really came out at the same time that we started thinking about a lot of these projects. 3 projects that we're working on now. Our first center running bus lane is on the left. You can kind of see a rendering of that on your screen. We're working on an outbound, and outbound in Boston terminology is just heading away from the city center. Inbound is heading towards the city center. So the MBTA uses that to sort of work, sort of have their cardinal directions for their transit services. And then outbound bus lane on Washington Street in Rosendale. I'm going to talk a little bit about the original Rosendale bus lane right now. So this is when we piloted a project, and I think it turned out pretty well. So going back to 2017 and into early 2018, the Rosendale, the Washington Street corridor rather, in Rosendale, it's a 1-mile corridor going from Rosendale Village, which is sort of a big residential commercial neighborhood, to the end of a rapid transit line, the Orange Line. There are 9 bus routes that use this corridor, and on a typical day, there could be up to 30 minutes of delay between those 2 points at the worst period of morning congestion. There were about 18,000 MBTA bus riders on this corridor every day, plus Boston Public School buses that use this corridor. So why pilot here? So we had strong community support, first and foremost, to do something like this. So the community was very interested in improving their trip time to get, obviously to the rapid transit connection, to get to the end of the Orange Line. And this was particularly interesting because the bus lane would have actually taken away parking between the hours of 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. on the street. And so we really wanted to understand, like, what's the support here? What's the community think? Let's look at this in terms of a pilot. Also, there weren't any other recent bus lane projects in Boston that we could point to and say, like, yeah, here are the technical specifications that we should be thinking about when we look at a permanent build. The last bus lane project was in 2002. So we really need to understand the operational challenges and again, the community challenges of implementing something like this. So what was this pilot? It was 1 month in early 2018. We used cones, VMS signs, and temporary no parking signs. We had enforcement support from Boston Police and MBTA Police. And we did extensive neighborhood outreach ahead of time. It was actually really sort of telling that my colleague who was a project manager on this said there were no vehicles that were towed on the first day of operations, which again, I think a testament to the extensive amount of community outreach that went in ahead of time. And what were the results of the pilot? So your typical AM peak bus saves about 25% of its trip, or about 6 minutes. Again, it could, some days it got up to 30 minutes, but typically it wasn't quite that long. Bus reliability and predictability improved significantly over the course of that 1 month. We also did surveys. So we heard from bus riders who obviously were very supportive of this. And interestingly, bike riders were supportive of this as well. You might think that buses and bikes sharing a lane is necessarily going to bring some conflicts up, but I think bike riders appreciated having a wider lane and not having as many chances of door rings and other issues with that condition. And what did this do? It led to a permanent implementation of the Rosendale bus lane in the summer of 2018. So quick evaluation, we saw that AM peak ridership grew by about 5% during this time. And we saw so that's about 160 extra riders. And it's been successful enough that we are now implementing an outbound PM peak bus lane in collaboration with the MBTA and the community. So really quickly, we're going to skip the pilot. And this is the story of Brighton Ave. So Brighton Ave is in a neighborhood called Alston. It's a very dense residential commercial neighborhood. It's sort of wedged between two big universities, Harvard and Boston University. And this corridor used to be served by a trolley line that was discontinued in the 1960s. So there's still actually some neighborhood memory of that really good transit connection that went through here. Today it's served by two key bus routes, 14,000 daily riders who were facing about 7 to 8 minutes of delay during peak times. And so we started to go out and talk to the community. We talked to merchants who were on the corridor. We surveyed bus riders. We went to community meetings. And what did we hear? We heard that transit delays were a big problem throughout the day, not just during the AM or PM peak, but really during the entire day. We heard that there were uncomfortable conditions for people walking, trying to cross the street, cycling, and waiting for the bus. We heard that parking was an important consideration for businesses and residences and should be retained where possible. As I said before, the corridor in Rosendale actually took away parking during part of the morning rush hour. We were told by the community and by the merchants specifically that this was essentially a non-starter. But there was overall support for transit improvements and transportation enhancements along this corridor. So again, working closely with the community, we decided to skip the pilot and go straight to implementation. We looked at two concepts. One was a peak period bus lane that used sort of the right travel lane, and then one was a existing, just having an all-day bus lane. We checked in with the community before moving ahead, and we decided to move ahead with an all-day bus lane, given that perception that congestion was an issue all day long, not just during the peak periods. And so what was the result of this? So travel time on Bright Nav decreased by about 4 minutes. So there was 7 to 8 minutes of delay. Ridership went up by 8 to 9% over pre-bus lane levels. Interestingly also, traffic counts decreased by about 13% after the bus lane went into effect. And so we think this was some level of people maybe diverting from Ubers and Lyfts and getting into buses because they were now more reliable, as well as people probably seeking alternative corridors. One thing that's been a challenge in Bright Nav has been enforcement. Having a bus lane and bike lane right next to parking has led to instances where people double park, has led to confusion from some drivers about how to use the facility. So this is something that we're still working on in terms of education, signage, and trying to implement some of these into our future projects. So very quick, to skip or not to skip the pilot. So pilots can be very resource intensive. So I think it's important to be strategic. The cone pilot that we did required our public works crews and operation crews to go out there daily, refresh cones, and sort of make sure that they were still in good condition. There are good reasons to do pilots. They can demonstrate what's possible and get buy-in, especially from the community and internally within your operations divisions. And it's to actually test a new idea. As I said, we hadn't done a bus lane in Boston since 2002 when we looked to do the Rosendale one. So it was good to understand what this idea was all about. Community outreach is key to help you determine your approach. So working with local partners, advocates is important, and then having data. So being able to demonstrate concretely what the delay, ridership, future development, that can all help to justify a project. So with that, I will hand back to Gabriella. My contact information is on the upper right if you have any specific questions for me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Matt. So we are going to extend the session until 11:35. So I'm going to ask one question for the panel, and we'll see what we can do. So what they tell us. So the question is, how do you think that COVID-19 has changed community engagement, and what can we learn from this? So a lot of you mentioned this, that in your projects you heard from the community and decided to make it permanent. So what advice can you give us?
I can really quick, if you don't mind. This is Christine. I can really say that I think people are feeling a lot more confident using the computer and using Zoom and other tools. So even our older generation, I think, has become very comfortable engaging that way. And so we've been able to have success engaging, for the most part, using those virtual tools. And then in some cases, if our leadership asks, we've had in person, and people are really good about, wearing their masks or social distancing. And we have, obviously opportunities for them to stay safe if they want to, and then posting those opportunities, either live streaming them on the internet, and then having surveys and comment sheets online for them to have access to.
Thank you, Christine. Anyone else have tips to share, especially when we think of our folks that are underrepresented and have some accessibility issues?
Yeah, I was going to say, in regards to that, I think I don't have any, it's not really a tip for reaching those groups, but I will say that doing these types of projects as a response to the pandemic and as a part of pandemic recovery has really made it apparent who oftentimes is not at the table, because suddenly we're doing these quick build projects, specifically for essential care workers to get to their destination safely, and for, to make sure that people are being most hard hit by the pandemic still have safe public space and transportation options. So I think it's just been an eye opener, I think, for a lot of us planners, to really come back to that quality public engagement to make sure we're reaching those people, even for projects that aren't necessarily, in pandemic response, including quick build projects. Just because they're temporary doesn't mean that you specifically skip out on a lot of those important public engagement pieces.
Thank you very much, Dana, Christine, Matt, and Noelle. This was a great conversation, and maybe we'll schedule a follow-up fireside chats and after this summit so we can address more of the wonderful questions that we got. So thank you all, and please join us for our next cafecito session.